Chapter 4 is going to be a little different from the first three chapters that we looked at because we looked at pulling data out of Oracle in our first three chapters. Now we're going to look at putting data in and how we can make that data work for us in a secure environment. So it's a little different spin on what we're going to do. Because of that, I'm going to have you write some code as we go through tonight. The page numbers that you see referenced in the lecture tonight are the page numbers for book number 2. So if you're having problems seeing it on the, or book number 3, if you have problems seeing it on the screen, I'll try and expand it a little bit, but you can also check that page number in your book and it'll show you what to enter. Let's talk about tables and views to begin with. We use a select query and we can create a new table. And we want to make sure that the table name is not in use at the time that we create it. One of the things that you need to know as we start through this is when we create a table, the data is not automatically updated. Faith, you're going to hate this part of it too, because even though you enter the data into Oracle, if you don't take an additional step, everything that you entered will be thrown out and it will revert back to the data that was there before. Yeah, I have known people who have cried, yes. All right, deleting tables, again, we talked about it when we talked about scripts, but deleting tables deletes the table and absolutely all of the data that's in that table. Gone forever. The only way you can recover, if you're lucky enough, is that your administrator has made a backup or has a mirrored copy of your database. And even that can't guarantee that you'll get all your data back. So I think I've said this once before, but those of you who might have a job where you work with Oracle, don't run any of the homework on your live machines because there's a potential to go in and delete numbers and delete tables and everything else. A view, absolutely the safest way to display your data. Views are going to update every time the original table is updated. So you'll see the changes automatically. Deleting a view doesn't delete the table, does not delete the data. It just deletes the view query, if you will. One of the things, the last bullet here that says don't remake tables. One of the things that my buddy Daryl did, and he was one of the developers of the database from hell, he decided that he needed a new date column. And so instead of figuring out the right way to do it, he said, I will just recreate the table. It'll add the date column, and then he recreated the table, and what happens? It erased all the data. Fortunately, they had a backup, but he was very worried for about 3 hours until they found the backup. So again, you don't remake tables just to add something. There's a procedure to go through to do that. This is our first query, and we're looking at we're going to create a table that's, you can see the name of it there on the screen. Is that big enough to see in the back? Yeah. And Becky, there are seats up front. I usually don't throw things that close. Oh, okay.
Normally there's somebody sitting there, so.
All right. But if you look at this and break down this create table, our creating table, we're actually using a select statement. And so anytime I'm going to create a table from data that's already available, I'm going to run that select statement first before I add in the example that's on the screen, line 2. I'm going to run that select statement first to make sure that it gives me exactly what I want. That way you're not making and dropping and messing around with your tables. You're going to get the table that you want the very first time. So this is a very simple one. It's just a quick query. We're going out, as you can see, to L_bar employees, and we're getting the employee ID, first and last name, and the department code. And we're getting it for the sales staff. So really a very easy way to create a new table should we need it. Now, we're going to use a new reserve word called describe. And anytime we use this word, it will tell us everything that Oracle knows about the table that we have asked it to describe. So the table we created in the slide before, the sales staff table, we're going to have that table described. And if you notice, it's got exactly in there as attributes the information that we put in under the select part of the query. So we've got employee ID, first name, last name, and department code. Please notice that the data is, or the attributes are created in the order that the select query goes after them. All right? So you can see how all of that works. So here's our select statement. As I say on this screen, let's test it first to make sure it works. So take just a couple of seconds, if you would. This is on page 140, and let's enter the select statement. Okay, so you've tested your query. It works. It gives you the desired results. The next step we're going to do is a little bit different than the one that we first talked about. Absolutely, we could create a table from this query, but instead we're going to create a view. And notice how the view is created. Create view, we give it a name, and that name can be anything you want to, but just make sure you remember it because we'll come back to this view a little bit later. As, and then we put our select statement. So all you have to do is add a line with that create view at the beginning, and you're ready to rock and roll. Once you've created that view, it's not going to be listed under tables. You're going to have to scroll down under your connections to SQL Fundamentals and the folder that says View. And then if you look under that View folder, you should see the section 0402 Sales Staff View that we just created. You'll notice at the end that we have View, and that's an Oracle kind of a tradition, whatever you want to call it, that if you're creating a view, you put view at the end so everybody knows that's a view. Well, it's listed under the view folder, so, but anyway, that's Oracle. Remember, Oracle hates you. So we have that set up. So with our code for the view, we might want to save that away somewhere, but we're not going to have to use that code again. We've already created the view. Now, let's do this code, but let me talk to you a second. Notice that our select statement are the attributes that we want to pull out of our view. Our from statement, instead of coming from our L_bar employees, which would give us every employee in every department, now comes from our sales staff view. So go ahead and enter this code in and then run it, please. Let's go ahead and run it and look at our results. Now, hopefully you're thinking, hey, wait a minute. if I've got data that I need to turn into information out of a table and I have to do it repeatedly, I can do it with a view and not have to type all that code in all the time, which is exactly what views are for. Every time we run this view, we will get the people that are in the salary department. If I add somebody and I run the view, I'll get that person that's added also. If I delete somebody and run the view, I'll also see that that individual is no longer in my database. Okay, so a view is one way that we can use to run a query that we're going to need several times. From a security aspect, a view allows people to see only the data that you want them to see. So we know that we have a credit limit in our L underbar employee table. If all you were allowed to work with was this sales staff view, you would never know that these sales employees have credit limits at the cafeteria. Out of sight, out of mind, you can't see it, you can't use the data. So from a cybersecurity aspect, the best way to present data when you are writing scripts or you're creating web pages or whatever is to use a view to present your data. And that way you're guaranteed the end user is only seeing what you want them to see. By the way, we can go in and we can edit data in a view, but if that data isn't displayed, then you can't edit it. So the only thing that someone could edit when we run our sales staff view are those 4 attributes that are displayed on the screen. So it's kind of a safety gauge, a safety measure for us as we work with our data. With all the hacking that's going on in the last couple of weeks, this is kind of a good tool to use. Difference between tables and views. Tables stores data directly on a disk or in digital memory if you're not using a disk. It's going to require the amount of disk space coincident to the size of the data in the table. All right? A table is static.
Can you explain that one?
Which one? Explain which one, Lee.
Static. But if I update my table, then it's dynamic, right?
Correct. You have to update the table for things to change. All right. So the data in that table is static until you add or take from it. All right. In a view, we can modify that data that's seen. So a view is dynamic, and we'll get to that in a second. You with me?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sometimes I ask questions so that other people can.
Okay, good. A view stores a select statement on disk. Really, all we're storing in a view is a select statement that we've tested, and we know that we want to run this every time we want to know who's in the sales department. Oh, and we also want to have their employee ID come up. SQL runs that query clause when the data is requested. Okay, and that's the only time it runs it. And it gives you a dynamic view. It displays the data that's currently in that table that has been committed. All right, and we'll start using the term committed more and more in the rest of the chapters that we cover this semester. Committed means that it is now officially in that table in our Oracle database. You might want to check out the matrix at the top of page 143. It goes into some of the details, a little more details on what can happen as you use tables versus views. Again, if you learn nothing else in the Oracle class, I'll be happy and Ken Dewey will be happy if you remember that a view is the most secure way to present data because it preserves that information that you're not showing. And before Lee asked, yes, you could probably hack into it, but with a view, you don't know all the data that's in the background. Use a table when you want to store the data that doesn't exist anywhere else in the database. So our employee table, that data is not going to exist anywhere else. Think back to week 1. Remember I said the thing I believe in about databases is enter the data one time, make sure it's correct, and then don't touch it again. All right? So we're entering data that doesn't exist anywhere else. Use a view when you want to present the data in a new way. All right. I very rarely, I don't write much Oracle code anymore, but when I did, I very rarely ran a query against a table. I'd use a view to display it on a web page or to run a report in the Enterprise Application Manager. It's just easier that way. Use a view if you want the data to change dynamically as other changes are made. And hold that thought for a minute because we're going to talk about different ways we can use views in just a second. So here, Becky suggested that we run select asterisk from our sales staff. We're going to get the same results as if we typed in the code. This is page 144 if you're walking along there. Now, we want to come down a little bit under the query you wrote, and we want to drop the view. And so we put drop view and the name of the view that we have and a semicolon at the bottom, and that's going to drop our view. What's cool about drop view is we're not dropping any data. We're not dropping any tables. All we're doing is eliminating the query that actually exists behind our view. So it can be a lifesaver sometimes. And if you go ahead and type that query in and run it, and then look under the view folder, you'll notice that your sales staff view is no longer there. Now we'll get into some uses of views and the ways that we can create them. First of all, a view can be created from another view. That's called layering. And you can create as many views as you want to. I had to do a review, we've talked about it a little bit before, of all the jobs that were done on all of the B-52s that were in production on any given day for a report that we used to manage some job control things. And so as I recall, I had about 7 different views that were pulling data from different areas. So that's an example of the layering that you can use. And I would call that data in to put into my report that was eventually displayed out on a web page. You can control the complexity of data of the queries that you're writing by using the layering method also. So that can help you do several different detailed select queries and not do as much nesting as maybe you would think you would have to. Trying to think about what coordinate 2 parts of a computer application mean. We'll have to come back to that one. A higher level view is run, or when a higher level view is run, any subordinate views are also run. So let's say that we have 4 views that we're running, and the first one calls the second one, the second, the third, and the third, the fourth. Whenever I run view number 1, all of those other views will be activated. So we're knowing that we're getting the accurate data based on those views being run at that specific time. Circular definitions aren't allowed, so you can't run view 1 and then later on say run view 1 again. So it just runs in a circle that way, so you don't want to do that. When we do a delete, and we'll talk about deletes I think in chapter 5, but when we do a delete, we want to do a cascading delete. And that would say if I delete view 1 and it calls view 2, then I'm going to delete view 2, view 3, view 4. There's a way you can set it up to make those views inactive instead of deleting them, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. So here we are, we're going to create a sales staff view number 1. And it's pretty much the same one as we had before, so you just can go back and reuse that code. Hopefully you didn't erase it. And notice now we're going to create a view that runs our sales staff view number 1. And then we're going to look for an employee ID less than or equal to 208. So I'll give you a couple of seconds to enter this. You noticed when we talked about the scripting that we deleted the tables before we created new ones, and that's called a preventative delete. So we want to drop the previous versions of a table or a view before we create them. And that way we're going to be sure that we have a clean creation. The gotcha on this is make sure that you absolutely want to drop that table. Not so much of a problem if you drop the view, it's just recreate the select statement. Again, if we drop the table, we drop all of the data and the table definition. Okay, what it's doing when we do a drop statement is we're going to ensure that the name's available, and we're going to prevent errors from coming up in SQL Developer. Who do you think's responsible for deleting a table? The administrator in, I would bet, 99% of the businesses is the one responsible for dropping a table. I know out at Tinker that was a command when before we had the mirrored databases that we were not allowed to use. And there were people who did it and made some catastrophic mistakes. I saw one guy in the morning use a drop table and erased the work performance from the day before. And he was a contractor. He was gone by noon. They had his badge and he was out of there. Because what he had deleted took about a day and a half to recreate off of the backups that were made. So you have to, the data drops, table drops are usually the responsibility of the tables. And the guy I was talking about was a fellow by the first name of Charles. And actually, the day he got fired was the 3rd time he had done it. And the first time they said, oh, that's an accident. Okay, don't do it again. The second time they said, you're fired if you do it again. And the 3rd time, they weren't lying. He was gone. So we do preventative deletes. The reserve word is drop. And you can see it right here. It's on page 150 in your textbook. Drop table, whatever the table name is, and then we would create that table again. Works extremely well. Keeps us out of trouble. Let's take about a 10-minute break and we'll come back and create some table.